Hello, this is the beginning of the second part of the video Aquaculture Sustainability Begins with Feed. So I hope you have had a chance to go and see that first video. And if you haven't yet, maybe you should go back and see that first, because while I'm talking about sustainability in this video about mainly sustainable aquaculture business. In the first video, I'm really talking more about the expectations of international markets and so on for sustainability, which really focuses on environment more than anything. So enjoy the video. So this is part two of Sustainable Aquaculture Starts with Feed. Now, I showed you this in the previous talk, part one, and I just wanted to bring it back to you again, just to remind you that we have environmental, economic, and we have social components to sustainability. But I think what's important to realize is that sustainability for the farmer comes first. We need to take care of the farmers. And so rather than focusing on what the Western countries want, let's focus on making the local business a sustainable aquaculture business for the farmer. That should be our first priority, because if he does not maintain the economics or the social doesn't help together, as mentioned in the part one talk, then we might have all the environmental regulations we want, but if the farms are all going out of business, and oftentimes, like for example, in the shrimp industry here in Asia, we do not control the prices. The commodity prices are controlled by other countries, by the importers, and it makes it very difficult sometimes for us to see our businesses as being sustainable. So if we look at what some of the certification agencies want, and then we look at something else, responsible aquaculture, then these are some of the things we need to be concerned about. Legal access to clean water, both surface water and underground. That might involve having license for using water. Storage ponds with water settling and treatment options. This is to reduce the biological risk of bringing pathogens in. It's part of a biosecurity program. We need to consider biological filtration with using fish and also plants. And that might involve using herbivorous fish, tilapia, for example, in ponds that are associated with a shrimp farm. And that has the purpose then of treating the water so we can have a closed system and keep reusing that water. What we're doing here is we're following risk reduction principles. so we have appropriate biosecurity measures. And we need to be careful about the animals that we bring in and the animals that we grow. So we need to find a reliable veterinary pathology lab. We need to have accurate pathogen monitoring for the broodstock, the larvae, and the fry. And we also need to avoid using drugs and chemicals indiscriminately without proper understanding of their use. And this is quite often a problem here in Southeast Asia and South Asia. We need to have access to domesticated rather than wild animals. And that happens for a very specific reason, and that is that we could, for example, catch all of the broodstock shrimp in the sea, and then we wouldn't have a business at all. But if we go to domesticated rather than wild caught animals, then we have a couple of options. We often will look for SPF or specific pathogen free animals. Now, they are specific pathogen free only until they empty the farm water. We dump them out of the bag from the supplier or hatchery. Um, but do they have any natural immunity if it's a disease that they have never seen before? So the other option is what we call specific pathogen resistant, and that is that the animals have been trained to be resistant to some of the most important or maybe some of the dominant pathogens. And this, in fact, is a more reliable indicator that we might have less difficulties on our farm with mortalities and with disease. And okay, I'm a nutritionist, I'm somewhat biased, but I also recommend that we should buy the most expensive feed that the farmer can afford because quality costs money. You pay more, you generally will get better quality ingredients, and those ingredients will have better digestibility. And then you have a lower FCR, maybe you have a higher ADG, and very important, you will also end up with better water quality. Now, back in 2017, Eric Brooks, writing for eFeedLink, which is a online website located from Singapore, was talking about the problems that we had with disease outbreaks. And in this case, he was specifically referring to China. And I'll quote this: having avoided the issues of food safety and ecological sustainability for years, a dwindling supply of frontier areas within China has put its aquaculture farm management methods into the spotlight. It, being China, finds itself unable to raise the output of many species beyond their present level without boosting stocking densities to levels that result in uncontrollable disease outbreaks. So what's the problem? Primarily outdated attitudes about feeds. Uh, and for me, we keep talking about low-cost feeds versus feeds that lower our total production cost. We lower our total production cost by having higher survival, higher yield, less disease, and that does not typically come with low-cost feeds. The feed quality is poor. We also need to have good feed management. And we need to have good management of water quality. Well, if the feed quality is poor, digestibility is low, then water quality oftentimes can become nearly uncontrollable. We need to worry about disease control, and we need to worry about biosecurity. Now, when we're talking about open aquaculture, that is aquaculture in reservoirs, aquaculture in lakes, as aquaculture in rivers, unfortunately, we face a higher risk from shared water. It's been polluted upstream, or it's been polluted by us due to overcrowding, overstocking, overfeeding in our limited water supply. And so these are some examples. Vietnam, pollution waste discharge from nearby seafood processors, resulting in high mortality. In the center, Singapore, this fish farm was calling for help because there had been a plankton bloom caused by sewage and agricultural runoff. And as you can see, that they lost tens of thousands of fish in their farm. And then on the right, Philippines, there was a change in the weather. After several cloudy days, they had huge die-offs. This was a very big story. I remember in 2011, hundreds of thousands of milkfish ended up dead in this lagoon, this lake. And it was due to oxygen depletion because they had no sunlight for a few days. They had eutrophic waters. They had algae consuming oxygen, removing it from the fish. And they lost, as it says down below, nearly 500 metric tons of fish worth nearly $1.2 million were lost. Now, here we see on the right-hand side, 2024, Philippines, Tropical Storm Christine, after several stormy days with high stocking densities, once again, oxygen depletion, 30 tons of tilapia lost to fish kill in Lake Cebu. And somewhere between 2011, when the first story happened on the left and this story happened on the right, why is mortality still occurring? Well, a large part of that is overstocking, overloading of the farming areas. In the meantime, the government had decreed that for fish farms using cages, that they stop using sinking pelleted feeds and they move to extruded floating feeds. But obviously that did not solve this problem. Now I'd like to talk to you about a problem that occurred in this province in southern Thailand called Songkhla province, and this is called Songkhla Lake. So this area is heavily farmed with cages, and they're growing Asian sea bass, or as the Australians call them, barramundi. So we have a city on this side, Songkhla town, and the only entrance to and from the sea occurs right here. So this is a very severe bottleneck, and that's representing this area down here. And in this area, you see there's a bridge here and a bridge here and an island which they call Koyo. And this area, then you can see here the number of cages that are indicated in this region. This is, I'm not showing you this, but here's their list. So then the thing is that this lake is connected by some short rivers up into this area here, which these authors call the Middle Lake. And this is the upper lake, and they're calling this one the lower lake. And you can see that in this area, there's a lot of nitrogen loading and also a lot of phosphorus loading, because this whole area here has a lot of agriculture and also agricultural industries. And so they have a lot of, I suppose, fertilizer use and so on and so forth, plus a lot of maybe scattered housing and so on. But there's a lot of people living up in here. And so we want to focus instead on this lake. So what we see is that we basically had almost every year, sometime during the rainy season, so middle of the year and towards the end of the year, that we would have these massive fish kills. You can see here that the cages are very close together and the water is not very deep. So if you look at this cage, you can see maybe this cage is not more than maybe 2.5 meters, maximum 3 meters deep. I can't really tell how big these fish are, but that just shows you that when this cage is in the water, fastened to these bamboo poles, that it's actually quite close to the bottom. And the bottom is quite anoxic because these people for years and years were feeding trash fish, not manufactured feeds. So we go and we talk to them and we say, well, you could have clean water, you could have a much less risk that you're going to have these die-offs every year if you switch to manufactured feeds and stopped using the trash fish. Now, they said, but the trash fish is only 6, 7 baht a kilogram, and uh, that's cheap, and your manufactured feeds are too expensive. Let's say the manufactured feeds in those days might have been around 25 baht. But the thing is that they're getting with their trash fish an FCR, let's say 5 to 6 on average. And if you take a price of 6 or 7 baht a kilogram and you multiply that by 5, you end up being basically about the same cost as manufactured feed that was available at that time. And with the manufactured feed, we're going to be getting an FCR maybe 1.4, 1.6 max. So the thing is, there was not really any advantage to the trash fish, but it took years for these people to get adapted to using manufactured feeds. And I believe most of these people have switched over now because basically the government mandated that they had to improve their game and stop polluting the water with the trash fish. As an aside, we also saw a lot of issues with the supply of trash fish, that it was not fresh, that whenever we had tropical storms, then the fishermen did not fish, and sometimes the fresh fish was not available. And all of these issues, in order to become a sustainable aquaculture business, they had to convert to manufactured feeds. So when we talk about nutrient loading and how to manage it, I would say that the least important, in my opinion, is the origin of the protein and the percentage of the protein in the feed. The most important are the protein quality and digestibility, the amino acid balance and digestibility. The better the feed is balanced, the lower the feed intake will be, the higher the FCR will be. The level of fat in the feed and the energy digestibility, the fiber content and digestibility, because fiber that remains undigested just ends up being pollution in the water, a substrate for pathogens, and a substrate for bacterial loading, which simply is going to increase. All of this is just simply going to increase eutrophication in the water and create an opportunity for decaying bottoms and also for the potential for oxygen depletion. We need to manage the anti-nutritional factors in the feeds. We need to assess and control the mycotoxins in the feeds. And we need the farmer to do proper feed management. When we talk about poor feed quality, and we're talking about poor palatability and wasted feed and reduced nutrient digestibility, we see a decrease in feed efficiency, or in other words, an increase in FCR. This increases our production cost, decreasing our profit. That does not lead to a sustainable farm business. We may have nutritional imbalances, and this can happen, for example, with using trash fish, especially freshwater trash fish, because it contains an enzyme called thiaminase, or in other words, anti-vitamin B1, and that can lead to total destruction of vitamin B1. And if we're not supplementing our feeds with vitamin B1 in some kind of a premix or another, it can lead to lots of problems: slow growth, weakened immunity, and deformity, and increased organic waste. So organic waste, well, we have high organic waste, so that leads to an increase in biological oxygen demand, increase in chemical oxygen demand, and due to loading of the water with phosphorus and so on, we have an increased risk of off flavors in the fish. And then we have a risk of low dissolved oxygen, which then can increase stress levels in the fish, reduce feed intake, reduce nutrient digestibility, and weakened immunity. And these are all perfect conditions for promoting pathogens and disease in our farmed animals. All of these problems can be solved by using a high quality feed and effective feed management. Now let's move on to some of the effects of poor water quality. So in this slide, I'm showing you that low dissolved oxygen reduces the growth rates in shrimp. So this was done with the Chinese white shrimp by Wei and et al. In 2009. Here's where you can find the paper. And so we see as the DO drops below 4.13 ppm oxygen, the growth rate decreases. So you see here, we see the dissolved oxygen, and below this level, we see a reduction in oxygen, but we also notice we see a drop in weight gain, we see a drop in feed intake, and we see a decrease in survival. As oxygen level goes down, shrimp use less metabolic energy, their metabolism is slowing down because they're deficient in oxygen, and feed consumption goes down. So FCR gets worse and growth goes down. This is on Nile tilapia. This is a paper, interaction between dissolved oxygen concentration and diet composition on growth, digestibility, and internal health of Nile tilapia. And so this was done in Vietnam. We have two diets. We have a controlled diet. You see the ingredients here, and we have a test diet. The main difference is that the control diet has 20% fish meal, the test diet has 0, and fish meal is replaced with soy, and basically that's about it. And fish oil is replaced with a higher level of soybean oil. So this was an 8-week experiment, and here's the oxygen level. So normoxia is 80% saturation, which at that temperature is 6.9 ppm oxygen. And then we had hypoxia, or 40% oxygen saturation, which at that temperature would be about 3.5. And when we look at these 4 oxygen levels and the high fish meal and low fish meal diet, we see that by week 8, the apparent digestibility of the crude protein has decreased very considerably, significantly lower in the diet, which is being fed high fish meal, but also low oxygen. And this is the same paper. Very interesting. Changes in intestinal morphology of Nile tilapia were affected by both diet composition and DO concentration, and that was visible after 4 weeks from the pathology, from the histopathology. The negative effect on intestinal morphology of increased plant protein inclusion was enhanced at low oxygen level. The soybean meal-like enteritis symptoms were not only depending on the diet and dissolved oxygen, but in time those symptoms worsened. Nile tilapia did not show any recovery signs after feeding soybean meal under hypoxic conditions, and they deemed it to be irreversible after 8 weeks. Now, these fish are not going to be grown for 8 weeks. They're going to be grown for maybe double that, maybe 16 weeks. And so the thing is that you're going to see a reduction in feed utilization, feed intake. You're going to see poor digestion, and you're going to see slow growth and maybe high mortality, all because of inadequate amounts of oxygen. Okay, so that's the end of this part two. It's a little bit shorter than the first one. And I hope that with these two videos now, you can understand more why sustainability really depends on feed. Okay, there you have it. The two parts of the video on sustainable aquaculture, starting with feed. And I hope you got something out of these videos. And if you have any insights, comments, information that you can share backed up with sources, I would very much appreciate having that contribution made here. And if you're students, please ask questions. And there's no such thing as a stupid question. But part of my goal here is to be able to make a lot of information available from my many years of experience available to people who are really just starting out. So enjoy the videos, and I will continue to make other videos for you. I have many, many, many planned, and so I look forward to, over time, recording many videos and making this channel a place where you can come to find information that you basically will not find anywhere else. And I particularly share a lot of the resources. All of the papers that I have, you can go and find them somewhere. And I think that's very important, particularly if you're a student, to be able to go and read the information directly for yourself, to be able to build your own knowledge base. So thank you very much.